Tonight on Bridge City News, a petition has been launched to try and get a homeless shelter built for the town of Cardston. Serial killer and rapist Paul Bernardo is denied parole. And some of Canada's top figure skaters were in town for a one-of-a-kind tour. BCN's Josie Foster has the details. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. We begin tonight with an update on Lethbridge Hurricanes player Ryan van der Vlis. The 20-year-old suffered severe burn injuries from a campfire accident back in June. Today he spoke with the media upon returning to the city to build his strength.
It's a bit of a process medically. I've learned more about human anatomy than I ever thought I would in the last 6 months. But yeah, my body's reacted really well to all the surgeries and everything that the healthcare staff at the Foothills has given me. So yeah, I'm extremely thankful for that. With a burn injury, I guess your metabolism kind of skyrockets and burns muscle mass versus fat. So half the battle is just getting your weight back up and keeping it there. And
we can find things for him to do and keep him busy, but he's going to be busy enough in his recovery with working out extra with our coaches and off ice coaches and things like that. We understand the challenges, but we're not going to baby him. And I don't think he wants that either. So.
Van der Vlis says he will not be traveling to away games with the team in the upcoming months. He does intend, however, to train with them on and off the ice as much as he can in between appointments and rehabilitation. For the full interview with Van der Vlis and Ann Holt, make sure you check out our website at bridgecitynews.ca. Canada's top figure skaters breathed the Lethbridge air last night as they took to the ice at the NMAC Centre. As Josie Foster reports, the one-of-a-kind tour is a way for the athletes to voice their appreciation for the fans.
The Thank You Canada Tour stopped in Lethbridge last night to thank our city for their support towards the national skating team. Canada's top dogs are traveling the country to voice their appreciation for fan support throughout their competitive careers. The cast includes three-time world champion Elvis Stojko and Canada's sweethearts Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer. Fans flooded the NMAC Centre to watch the show. Local coaches and skating fanatics alike were touched by the performances.
To see Elvis Stojko do his solo from when he went to the Olympics,
yeah.
Everyone was teary-eyed. It was amazing, wasn't it?
Oh, well, very sentimental.
Yeah.
I have loved Patrick Chan since I was a kid. I've always wanted to see him skate. I've always idolized him, so seeing him tonight already was fantastic. It's absolutely chilling in some sense.
And for others, the evening inspired their own skating endeavors.
Who's your favorite person from the cast?
Probably like Caitlin Osmond, but she's a single skater and she's a girl, so she makes me proud and all that. It makes me want to think I can do that one day.
This is the best year ever in the history of medals at the Olympics. To have that many medalists at the Olympics for Canada is amazing. It shows you something about what's going on here in the coaching and the skating world, you know?
The tour stops in Red Deer tonight and heads to Regina Friday. For Bridge City News, I'm Josie Foster.
Lethbridge College celebrated our Indigenous community today. College students and faculty gathered in the center course celebrating the day on campus. The college also revealed a new display featuring its relationship with the Indigenous community and its Blackfoot name. After procession, Kainai Elder Peter Weasel Moccasin surprised Lethbridge College President Dr. Paula Burns with her own Blackfoot name.
A huge honor. It's actually hard to describe in words. I'm very respectful of what it means to be given a Blackfoot name and the responsibility that goes with that. As we've partnered with the Blackfoot community and with other Indigenous communities, it's a huge honor to be made part of that, which means that we have leadership opportunity in it.
We're constantly moving, and so our past is part of the future and part of the present, and with this display, we wanted to tell that story of the Blackfoot people, to be able to see the present, that we've persevered from the past, and we're still going, we're still here, and we're moving forward. We're not just a people of the past.
Tomorrow will be a year since Lethbridge College received the Blackfoot name Stonepipe. SACPA heard from a survivor of Hurricane Maria that hit Dominica last September. School principal Steve Hippolyte survived the hurricane and was one of the guest speakers. He appeared alongside Maurice Hollingsworth for the IT for Dominica Foundation. The issue the speakers addressed was what help developed countries can offer to those more vulnerable to natural disasters.
Looking at us as global citizens, and in terms of the change that we've had in climate, when countries undergo certain devastating impacts of hurricane, who is responsible sometimes, how can we share the responsibilities in terms of the rebuilding efforts that we have.
Hippolyte also works with the IT for Dominica Foundation, an Alberta-based program with Ministry of Education in the Commonwealth of Dominica. A new position has been launched to build a homeless shelter in the town of Cardston. Ty and Levitt created the petition to give council a push to take proper steps in helping the homeless in the area. Levitt says she has chatted with members of council and steps are being taken to address the issue. Levitt says Cardston Town Council has put a funding in place for a friendship centre. She is encouraging people to make donations so this can become a reality. Levitt also says donations are needed for the Kainai Food Fund. A 12-year-old sentence is being sought by the Crown for a Central Alberta man who pleaded guilty to child pornography and sexual assault charges. 55-year-old Stuart Peter Hunt of Red Deer was arrested in his home last January. Police seized electronic devices containing thousands of child porn images. Hunt admitted that he had sexual contact with young boys going back 20 years. Hunt's lawyer Dan Wilson says he hopes his client gets professional help while in jail to resolve his deep-rooted issues. The defense is seeking a 10-year sentence. The sentence will be handed down on November the 26th. RCMP say officers have located a missing woman who was the subject of an urgent assistance bulletin. Police say Aurora Rafer was found safe during a search that included the RCMP emergency response team. Mountie say a 47-year-old man was taken into custody in relation to her disappearance. No details are being released as to what happened or whether the subject will face any charges. The Calgary police are looking for suspects following a high-end jewelry heist. Last Friday, police were called to a business in the city's northeast. The unknown culprits broke through the walls of two neighboring businesses to gain access to Sophia jewelry and diamonds. Police released photos of the stolen jewelry, which includes gold necklaces and diamond rings. An undisclosed amount of cash was also taken. If you have any information about the jewelry heist in Calgary, contact Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. That's 1-800-222-TIPS. A few drivers were hit with tickets for breaking the law on the first day of legal recreational pot use yesterday. Now, some of the infractions involve people having marijuana while operating a vehicle. Winnipeg police tweeted a picture of a $672 ticket handed out to someone spotted using cannabis in a vehicle. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is calling for the deletion of criminal records for people convicted of simple pot possession. Singh says people who receive pardons will still be negatively impacted by the records.
With pardons, they are really suspensions of records. A suspension of record will not be recognized by the states, so someone who receives a pardon for a personal possession, a nonviolent minor offense, will still not be able to travel to the states. It still continues to have serious impacts on employment, opportunities to volunteer, and that's why a pardon will not be sufficient to bring justice to the lives of people. A deletion of record will ensure that people can travel, will ensure that barriers are removed. Now, what makes me terribly concerned is the fact that the public safety minister, when asked about expungement versus pardons, has said, no, I'm going to proceed with pardons, and said no to expungements. And the reason given is he said that this is not a historical injustice. I disagree.
Governor General Julie Payette is to make her first official visit to Saskatchewan on a tour that includes a Humboldt Broncos hockey game. Today she met with Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. Tomorrow, the former astronaut will tour a Canadian Forces base in Moose Jaw. On Saturday, the plan is for Payette to visit the Humboldt Broncos memorial exhibit before watching the junior hockey team in action. Regina's Santa Claus Parade has been canceled. The event's organizer, Southland Mall, says it will not hold the parade this year and will instead focus on supporting families in need. The mall says it hopes people will support the change as it focuses on community initiatives across the city. A mall spokesperson says they will still be decorating the mall just in time for the Christmas holidays. A BC man accused of stripping and jumping into a tank filled with sharks at Toronto's Ripley's Aquarium is facing charges. Before the close encounter with the sharks on Friday, Toronto police allege 37-year-old David Weaver assaulted a man outside of Medieval Times. He's facing 1 count of assault causing bodily harm and 2 mischief-related charges. A lawyer for the families of Paul Bernardo's victims say they are glad the convicted killer and rapist was denied parole yesterday. Tim Danson says Bernardo has never shown remorse or apologized to the families.
We're obviously relieved by the decision. We don't take anything for granted. It was a very difficult process for the families. It was very difficult for the families to hear Paul Bernardo's evidence, if we want to call it that, his explanations for his crimes. We're certainly also relieved not just that day and full parole was denied, but that the parole board, with obviously reasons to follow, have reaffirmed the dangerous offender designation. And it is in the victim impact statement, I know Donna referred to it specifically in her victim impact statement, that there's never been an apology by Paul Bernardo. There's been never any indication whatsoever of remorse. And other than, I think some self-pity that we saw today, there was nothing that we saw where Paul Bernardo reached out to the family to say, I'm sorry, and that he's remorseful. What he talked about was he knows that what he did was wrong and it was terrible, but that's something different than reaching out to the families and apologizing to them directly.
Crews from an Arizona sheriff's office have rescued a man who became trapped after falling into an old abandoned mine shaft on Monday.
I've been around a few rescues, but nothing like this.
Get down. Nice and easy.
Well, he had called me Monday and told me he was coming to the mine, and always had a deal, well, if he's not back by Tuesday, the carabiner broke, I guess. Since he didn't come home yesterday, I was bound and determined I had to come down today. Just as I pulled up in the truck, I could hear him hollering, help, help,
Do you consider yourself kind of a hero in this story?
No. No.
Authorities in Madison, Wisconsin say a missing girl's parents were shot to death in their house while the girl was at home.
Today, the autopsies were completed and the medical examiner has ruled the deaths of Denise and James Kloss as homicides. Based on our investigations thus far, we believe Jamie was in the home at the time of the homicides, and we believe she is still in danger. Her parents died from gunshot wounds. That's why we are ruling this a homicide. There was no gun found on the scene, and we believe Jamie was home based on the evidence in our case. Some of it from that 911 call, and some of it is still a part of the ACTA investigation, and we're not able to comment on why we believe that. Is it a random attack or is it a targeted attack? I don't know that answer. That is why those leads are so important. Again, we've received no other threats or anything in the local area to say that this was just a random act, but we do not know that answer, and we continue to follow up on leads to hopefully answer that question.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he told Saudi Arabia's rulers that the U.S. takes the disappearance of journalist Jamal Khashoggi very seriously.
Had a chance to talk with in Riyadh with the King, with the Crown Prince, with the Foreign Minister, all of the United States counterparts there. We made clear to them that we take this matter with respect to Mr. Khashoggi very seriously. They made clear to me that they too understand the serious nature of the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi. They also assured me that they will conduct a complete, thorough investigation of all of the facts surrounding Mr. Khashoggi, and that they will do so in a timely fashion. And that this report itself will be transparent for everyone to see, to ask questions about, and to inquire with respect to its thoroughness. And I told President Trump this morning that we ought to give them a few more days to complete that, so that we too have a complete understanding of the facts surrounding that, at which point we can make decisions about how or if the United States should respond to the incident surrounding Mr. Khashoggi.
Swedish superstar Bjorn Ulvaeus is stunned by the continuing success of his band ABBA 36 years after the split-up. He says the band will finally be coming out with new music next March.
Well, the thing is, I can't explain it. I'm as astonished as everyone else. I don't know how that happened. I was just talking to some people yesterday about the beginning of the 80s when we split up. How I really, really thought that, well, that was the end of it. And it has come back and right now with a vengeance. And I'm just, grateful. And it also makes me very, very humble because it's kind of a miracle that it should happen like that. I mean, we split up in 1982.
Still one of my mother's favorite groups, and new music next March. She'll be happy to hear that. The sunshine has been music to our ears here in southwestern Alberta. More of it and warmer temperatures are on the way. I'll have a complete look at the weather forecast in just a moment. Another warm day in our city. A few clouds rolling in tonight with a low near +1. Tomorrow mainly sunny with a high near 14 expected. Saturday lots of blue sky and sunshine with a high near 17. Sunday mainly sunny with a high of 14. Monday sunshine with a high near 18 degrees. Tuesday even warmer, blue sky sunshine and a high near 22. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 14 degrees and an average low of 0. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2003 at 25 degrees, and the record low a chilly -17 in 1951. Sunrise was at 7:57, sunset at 6:36. Let's have a look at how tomorrow is shaping up across the country. Vancouver will be mainly sunny at 15, even warmer in Victoria, sunshine and a high near 18. A clear sky and 12 is expected for Calgary. Edmonton will have a mixture of sun and cloud and 11. Clearing in Regina, sunshine and 10 degrees. Saskatoon also looking at sunshine and a high near 10 tomorrow. Winnipeg will have light showers and a high of 9. Over in the central part of the country, Toronto will be partly cloudy and 14. Ottawa will have a mixture of sun and cloud and get up to 15. Montreal will be mainly overcast and 14 degrees. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick tomorrow will have a high of 8. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be mainly sunny and 7. A good chance of snow mixed with rain in Charlottetown, PEI tomorrow and a high of 5. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, there'll be rain and a high of 5 degrees as well tomorrow. The warmer temperatures we've been receiving has brought a measure of hope to farmers. They're racing against the clock to harvest more than $3 billion worth of crops in the fields. An unusually snowy fall slowed or even halted the progress of the 2018 harvest. If weather conditions were normal, things would be wrapping up by now. According to the Alberta government's recent crop report, less than 50% of the province's seeded acres have been harvested as of October the 9th. The Canola Council of Canada is welcoming the passage of Bill C-79, which will implement the trade deal known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Council says the trade agreement is an opportunity for the canola industry to increase value-added exports. Officials say Canada cannot currently export those products to countries like Japan because of high tariffs. The Council notes that Australia already has a free trade agreement with Japan, and that puts our country at a competitive disadvantage. Officials say once tariffs are fully eliminated in Japan and Vietnam, exports of Canadian canola oil and meal could increase up to $780 million per year. Cattle producers are applauding new market access for Canadian livestock in Southeast Asia. Ottawa announced new market access for live cattle exports to the Philippines, along with sheep and goat genetics to the Philippines and Indonesia. Saskatchewan stock growers say it's important to expand Canadian livestock markets to diversify the customer base. General Manager Chad McPherson says Canada has some of the best livestock genetics in the world, and any improved market access is welcome. The market for live cattle exports to the Philippines is estimated to be valued at $8 million per year. With the Bank of Canada raising its key interest rate over the past year, homeowners with variable rate mortgages may be thinking of switching to a fixed rate. A spokesperson with BMO Mortgages outlines the pros and cons of both types of mortgages.
Variable rates are rates that can fluctuate, that can change. However, historically, they have been a bit cheaper than fixed rates. On the other hand, you have fixed rates that would offer the consumer a certain certainty in terms of the interest that they're paying for the duration of their loan with the payments that they have. This is definitely a pivotal time for borrowers who have used or leveraged variable rates. It is a time where where we are in a rising interest rate environment, And it's always good to have a pulse check, basically, and have a mortgage review with your bank, just to review where you are and assess your options. Switching to a fixed rate would give you a certain peace of mind for sure, because you know that you have a specific interest rate for the duration of the term, or basically the period where you're taking on that contract, as per se, with your bank. And at the same time, you know what your payments are, so you are not subjected to any fluctuation or any surprise in terms of seeing your payments increasing during the duration of your loan. There are pros and cons about both fixed interest and variable rates. That being said, if you are on a variable rates right now, you have to say that it is a bit cheaper than fixed rates. Even though, as I said earlier, there's a narrow spread between both. The other thing is that, let's say, and it all depends on the position where you are. It depends on your plans for the short term. If you're planning on selling your house and you're planning on purchasing a new property, if you want to get out of your mortgage and break your mortgage, definitely the penalties are a bit cheaper on variable mortgages versus fixed interest mortgages.
Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge Hurricanes' Ryan van der Vlis is back in the city and held a media conference earlier today. Van der Vlis, who was severely injured in an explosion in Calgary last June, is still recovering from his injuries and is continuing with rehab. Van der Vlis says since his accident, he has undergone multiple surgeries and lost about 50% of his muscle mass. He's hoping to one day return to the ice playing competitive hockey once again. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Canadians should be concerned about radicalized Muslims. Now that's according to Raheel Raza, president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow. Hear what Ms. Raza has to say next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Are you interested in getting to know people from different cultures? Volunteer Lethbridge is holding information sessions on October 18th and 20th. Find out how you can make a difference in a newcomer's life by supporting their transition to Lethbridge. For more information, call Shelley at 403-332-4320 or email office@volunteerlethbridge.com. The Nigerian Canadian Association of Lethbridge and the Sobo Yejo Turning Point Foundation are presenting a symposium on global migration and Canadian immigration on Saturday, October 27th at the Main Public Library, downtown Lethbridge, from 2 to 5 p.m. Hear from top experts about the challenges and opportunities immigration presents to our communities and country. Admission is free and all are welcome. The Gem of the West Museum Society in Coaldale is holding its annual Craft and Hobby Show on Saturday, November 3rd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Admission is by donation. Come and see unique pieces from local artists, crafters, and vendors. For more information, contact Myrna at 403-345-4521 or email mlmo@shaw.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The issue of Muslims becoming radicalized in Canada and around the world is a controversial issue that some completely shy away from talking about, while others may take a real hard line on it. Today's guest is no stranger to talking about it. Raheel Raza, president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow and author of the book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad. Raheel, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you.
Now, can you tell me briefly what the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow is all about?
Yes, our mission is to reclaim Islam as a religion of peace by opposing extremism, violence, and fanaticism in the name of religion. And our vision is to invite Muslims to come into the 21st century, that therefore use of the term tomorrow, and to look into the future, to embrace the values of liberal, small L liberal democracy, gender equality, to condemn armed jihad, to embrace separation of mosque and state, and all the values that brought us here.
Now, there's some Canadians who have a certain degree of fear of Muslims, Islamophobia, especially with a lot of the terrorist attacks we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, largely because of the radical elements that we see rise up at times. Should we be worried about Islamic radicalization in Canada?
Well, I'm a Muslim, and I can tell you that I'm worried about Islamist radicalization. And I like to differentiate between Islam and Islamism. Islamism is the political ideology. That is the radical ideology. And so, yes, radical Islamist ideology is something that we should all be worried about. We've seen the recent attacks in Canada. We have seen our government trying to appease the communities instead of actually addressing the issues head on. That radicalization does exist, and it's of two kinds. There's a violent terrorist radicalization, which results in killing and violence. And then there is the nonviolent extremism, which is the ideology. And we have to be worried about both.
What do you think of the idea of potentially putting spies in some of these radicalized mosques who are preaching and teaching against killing the infidels and maybe attacking Canadians?
Well, I wouldn't call it spying. I have a very extreme view on this, and I've written about it. And I did put out a call to all Canadians. I believe that any place of worship, whether it's a mosque or any other place of worship, if they are promoting hate, if they are calling their youth to violence and jihad, it should be shut down. Because this is not a place where we promote hate. And you have to remember that radicalization is the result of hate mongering. It's a very simple connection of the dots. How do ordinary young people get radicalized? They get radicalized because they are taught hate. They're taught to dehumanize the other. If this is happening in our institutions or in our mosques, then I certainly believe that they should be shut down.
Now, how would you define a radical Muslim? Where does that line get crossed?
Well, a radical Muslim is a person who goes directly against the mission and vision statement and the values that I presented to you, someone who supports the idea of armed jihad, who justifies violence in the name of religion, who does not believe in gender equality, who does not respect those who follow a different path. For example, a people of other faiths or people of no faith. And this is something we are very clear about in our mission statement, that we respect everyone who follows a different path, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, whether you are from the LGBTQ community, whether you're a minority, we have to respect everyone equally. And radicals are those who don't. They are dogmatic, and they only believe that what they say is right.
Is it just a small percentage of Muslims who are radicalized?
You know, that's a very tricky question. Because, yeah, the short answer is yes. But then when you look at a small percentage of 1.8 billion Muslims, that's a large number. Now, there is a very short, very fantastic documentary that's been made by the Clarion Project. It's called By the Numbers. I have narrated it. It has been well researched based on a Pew poll, which tells you the mindset and ideology. We can't forget that we are at war, a war of ideas. You know, the radicals, the extremists, ISIS, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, whatever name you call them, they're all the same. They have declared war on the West and its values. And it's, again, as I said, a war of ideas. Now, when people have bad ideas, negative ideas, ideas about violence, ideas that say that it's okay to kill someone who it's okay to kill a woman who has had an extramarital affair, or it's okay to kill people who are homosexuals. These are ideas. They may not be doing it, but the ideas are there. So these are radical ideas. And therefore, it is a very dangerous trajectory. And from what we have seen since 9/11, this ideology has grown and it has been promoted and funded by petrodollars from the sands of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Iran and through institutions.
The Liberal government has gone on record saying that radicalized Muslims can be rehabilitated. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, there have been some instances of radicals who have come back round, but very few and far between. There is Majid Nawaz in England who runs the Quilliam Foundation. There are one or two in America. But it, as I said, because it's an ideology, I suppose it could be reversed. Radicalization is a result of big brainwashing, and it could be, but you have to have very extensive programs. Does our government have programs to de-radicalize people? No, they can't even use the term radicalize. I mean, now you've got M103, which is a motion that doesn't allow us to have this conversation because you will be called racist. You're not a Muslim. I am also called anti-Muslim. This is the problem that we have here. So how are we going to de-radicalize anyone when we don't even understand what the virus is, what the problem is? What we are trying to do is treat a disease, a very, very extensive disease like cancer with aspirin, with Band-Aid. It doesn't work. Yes, I suppose there could be de-radicalization, but you have to have excellent programs in place.
What about moderate Muslims? Are they speaking out against radicalization? And if not, why?
Well, there are a large number of moderate Muslims that come and sit in my living room and they will agree with us, but they won't say anything in public. So, the problem is they're not speaking out enough. This is what we call the silent majority. The people who are not radical, they're sitting on the shelf, but as far as I'm concerned, if they don't speak out, they are part of the problem. Now, they don't speak out for many reasons. They're afraid. They're afraid of physical harm. Look at what happens to people who speak out. They're killed. And so they're afraid. They've been brainwashed into political correctness. And let me tell you that our mosques and our institutions, many of them promote what is known as the victim ideology, that no matter what happens, you as Muslims are the victims. You've got an organization called CARE, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations, which also has a branch here in Canada called the NCCM. They promote this victim ideology. That's why we've got M103, so that anytime there is a conversation about radicalization or Islam or Muslims, it's shut down.
Now, is part of the problem a lack of integration into Canadian society? Many immigrants tend to live together in the same community, the same pockets, and don't get to know people from other cultures.
Well, that is part of it, but every immigrant community that has come into Canada has tried to live together because, it's practical, it's a sense of comfort and security. But the next generation, the children, do integrate, they assimilate, they become part of the mainstream. And how do we do that? By embracing Canadian values. Now, here we are in Canada, where thanks to our government, we are not even allowed to talk about Canadian values. When I speak to Canadian audiences and I say, you must speak to your children, you must teach them Canadian values. This is why we came here. They say, what are Canadian values? Canadian values are the values of humanity, respect, tolerance, gender equality, freedom of expression, extremely important. And this freedom of speech and freedom of expression is being curtailed at every step in universities, in all educational institutions, and in government. So we have a government that sort of wants to deflect, look the other way, and act like nothing is happening, whereas people have been killed on the streets. So yes, integration is a problem.
Now, mainstream media seems quite hesitant to call out radical Islamists as being radical. Now, I saw your quote on Twitter recently with regards to the Toronto Danforth shootings. You said, if we Muslims don't own up to the problem of radicalization, these mental illnesses will only grow. And I haven't seen a statement by Canadian Muslim MPs on the Danforth shooting. Could it be Islamophobia maybe stopping them?
Well, they would like to say that. I think it's a deflection. It's not addressing the issue head on. We waited for them, not just the Muslim MPs, but any MPs, for our Prime Minister to make a statement to say, we have a problem of radicalization. How difficult is that? But yes, mainstream media is so much into false news, into fake news. They need to address the issue head on. Very often we have these incidents and for a moment there is a lot of news and then it just dies out. And people never find out what really happened. We have a problem of addressing the issue head on. A doctor will tell you that if there's a virus, unless you identify it, you will never find a treatment. Radicalization is a virus, and we have not been able to identify it. Therefore, we will not be able to find a solution.
So if there's a potential of radicalization in my neighborhood, and I know about it, what should be the first step? Should I reach out to police and let them know? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I believe you should. Whoever the authorities are, whether they're security agencies, whether it's the RCMP, whether it's CSIS, they are clamoring and begging people to help them. They want to speak to communities, but there is a door that's shut on them. I know, because they do reach out to us and say, how can we go and speak to the communities? But these communities, the Muslim communities at large, especially the newer immigrant communities, have been told by certain mosques and certain organizations, do not help the authorities, do not speak to them, they are your enemy, they are going to try and cause you harm. And so they don't speak out. So there isn't that communication between the communities and the law enforcement agencies or the security agencies.
A contentious issue a little while ago was between the Tories and the federal Liberals, whereas the Liberals say once a Canadian, always a Canadian. Somebody from Syria or Iraq comes over, they have these radicalized ideas, they murder Canadians. The Tories were saying you lose that Canadian citizenship and you get shipped back to the country where you came from. The Liberals say, no, you'll always have your Canadian citizenship regardless. If you go out and murder people, you're radicalized, it doesn't matter. What are your thoughts about dual citizenship?
Well, I have a lot of difficulty with the idea that if someone who has taken Canadian citizenship and then is traitor to the country by going and fighting a jihad should not be given that Canadian citizenship, or they should be stripped of that Canadian citizenship, because that's treason. It's very clear for me. It's black and white. Now, thanks to this policy of appeasement, this wishy-washy policy, we have 60 ISIS fighters back in Canada because the Liberal government believes that, they should live like ordinary citizens. I have met a Yazidi girl who was enslaved, raped, and sold many times, who came here as a refugee and then saw her ISIS captor face to face on a bus. Now, one should ask her how she feels about this. So, I have very clear opinion on this, that if someone is not in favor of this country and its values, they shouldn't be here. There are many countries where they can go and fight the jihad. There still are. So why are they bringing those ideas, those values, those radical ideologies here? And why is our government welcoming them with open arms? Canada has more or less become a safe haven for all kinds of criminals from all over the world. Let's go to Canada. There we can live safely. We'll be given Canadian citizenship. They'll even help us with our mortgage.
You know what? Let's talk a bit about immigration. Should Canada continue to open the doors wide open for refugees from Islamic countries? Or do we maybe do things a little bit differently and maybe bring in proper vetting or more vetting?
As a human rights activist, as a human being, a mother and a grandmother, I believe that, it's very important to help people who are in trouble. But let me put out a simple analogy. Would I invite someone into my house if I didn't know who they were? No, I wouldn't. Even though they were in trouble, I would like to know who they are. We need to have better, more consistent vetting policies. We need to know who these people are, just like any other immigrants or refugees. They should be put to the same standards of vetting like we did. My ancestors were traced back like 4 generations before I came to Canada when I applied for my immigration status. That's not the same anymore. We should have a very strong vetting process in place, and then those who get through it should be welcomed. But there should be programs, again, to rehabilitate them. You just don't bring them in without language, without cultural differences, and then go and dump them in some part of Canada which needs more people and expect them to survive. It's not fair to the local community. It's not fair to the immigrants. So where are the programs? I don't know. I haven't seen them.
Raheel Raza, president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow and author of the book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
A newly published study of older adults residing in assisted living and independent living communities shows significant improvement in brain processing speed among those who used a particular brain exercise. Neuroscientist Dr. Henry Monca, CEO of Posit Science, joins me now from San Francisco, California, to chat about the study. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Dr. Monca.
It's great to be here, Hal. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, first of all, can you give me some perspective? What percentage of older adults struggle with slow cognitive abilities, even dementia?
Well, that's a great question. You know, if we look at dementia, what we know is that once people are over 85, that can actually affect almost half of all people. But if we step back from dementia and say, hey, what number of people are affected by just slowing down a bit, by having their memory be a bit worse? And the answer really starts to be not quite everyone. There's always a few people who are extremely sharp at any age, but almost everyone looks back and says, hey, I was a little faster when I was in my 50s or in my 30s, and my memory was a little bit sharper. So this mild form of cognitive change, you know, it's not dementia. I don't want people to think they have Alzheimer's disease the moment they forget their keys, but it does represent a change in normal cognitive performance. And it's something that increasingly we can do something about.
Now, can you tell me how the study was done? What kinds of brain exercises were these seniors actually doing?
Sure. This study was run in Iowa by an independent academic researcher named Dr. Fred Walensky. And he's been studying a set of cognitive exercises that were developed quite some time ago that are actually designed to speed up and make more accurate how the brain processes information. Literally, a person doing these brain exercises will sit in front of a computer or their iPad, and they're going to look at the screen, and they're going to see something come on the screen in the center of their vision. And it's something, a little picture like a car or a truck. It's a little bit hard to say which it is. And they have to look carefully at the center of the screen, and they also have to pay attention to their peripheral vision, and they have to notice where something is happening in their peripheral vision. And it sounds a little obscure, but what it's asking the brain to do is it's asking the brain to spread the brain's attention while operating very quickly. And by doing that, it turns out we can actually make the brain faster and more accurate.
So it would reverse the normal slowing down of the brain, these exercises?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's been shown really in dozens of trials at this point, and including an extremely large trial called the ACTIVE study that studied almost 3,000 people and followed them for more than 10 years. What's exciting about the new results is that most studies so far have looked at older adults who are independently living in their own homes and shown that we can protect against cognitive decline. This is really one of the first studies to take a step forward and say, well, hey, let's see if this can work with people who are in assisted living or in independent living already. They're a little bit older on the average. They typically have a few more health conditions already. They're typically a bit more worried about cognitive decline than people who are still operating independently. Can the same tool be used to help those people sharpen their brain function and improve their cognitive function? And what the study shows is yes.
So at what age does our brain processing speed first start to slow down? When did we first notice that?
Hal, I have terrible news for you and me both, because the answer is about the age of 27. And I don't want to be picky.
Well, I'm a little over that
screen
now.
Here,
yeah,
but I think we're both comfortable saying we're just a tiny bit over 27. So yeah, cognitive performance really peaks in our 20s. At the age of 27, and then certainly in our 30s, we can start to notice just the tiniest changes in speed and attention. And of course, those changes on the average get bigger as we get older.
So when does it actually dramatically slow down? Maybe by the time you hit 65, when you retire?
Around 65 is when we can start to see that performance really start to fall off. You know, one way that we think about cognitive decline is that it's preserved, it's maintained by active, really engagement in the world. If you think about life at work, your life at work, for example, you have to be sharp. You're on the air. You have to be fast. You have to think of questions. You have to hear people like me talking a little bit more quickly than you might prefer. Your brain has to do all that work to keep up. And there's a lot of thought that when we retire, you know, some people have a ton of hobbies and they keep all that cognitive stimulation going. When my mom retired, for example, she started a neighborhood association in Washington, D.C. She basically became a small businesswoman and hired people and so forth. She kept very busy. But other people, they retire and they think, well, it's a good time to sit on the sofa and catch up on a lot of old TV. And because the brain's not getting that stimulation anymore, that probably accelerates some of the cognitive decline that we see.
So what are some of the games maybe we can incorporate into our daily lives? The old Rubik's Cube, like way back from the 80s, Sudoku? I mean, what could we actually do? Find the word, connect the dots, right?
That's a great question. And, of course, I work at Posit Science. We make a cognitive training company, a program called Brain HQ. Let me tell you a little bit about that first, and then I'll talk about some other things a person might think about it as well. Now, the study that we're talking about today used a cognitive exercise that's now part of Brain HQ. That exercise is called double decision. And, of course, that represents a way a person can use their computer, use their iPad to do something that's very scientifically based and been proven to help people stay sharp. That same researcher at the University of Iowa, Dr. Fred Walensky, had previously run another very large study called the IHAM study, where he compared this kind of brain training to crossword puzzles. And what he showed there actually was that this kind of specific scientifically based brain training was better than crossword puzzles at improving speed and attention. Now, that being said, when we think, hey, why do these specific kind of brain training exercises work and maybe crossword puzzles don't? Well, the answer is what the brain craves is new learning, and what it needs is to become fast and accurate. So when I think about crossword puzzles, it's not really about learning something new. Most people who enjoy crossword puzzles have been doing them for 30 or 40 years. The brain's almost working on autopilot. What the brain needs is to learn new things, learn a new language, learn a new route to the store, learn a new musical instrument. Again, I'll go back to my mom. She picked up the harpsichord, and of all the interesting things, she had inherited one. And that was tremendous new learning and kept her brain fast and accurate. So those are the kinds of ordinary day-to-day activities we look at and say, hey, can we get people to engage in more of those kinds of activities? In the same way that a person can keep a healthy body by starting regular exercise, walking, for example, jogging, going to the gym, we'd like to see people keep a healthy mind by engaging in these kinds of speed and accurate brain exercises.
You know what, maybe we should get my mother to learn how to play electric guitar, then we can form a band, maybe hit the road and make some extra cash, help with their retirement, right?
I think that's a great idea. I'd love to see more of that. I'll buy a ticket when you guys tour San Francisco.
So Dr. Manka, what about walking or balancing abilities? How will a lot of those tests actually help in that regard?
Sure. So as well as those kinds of cognitive issues, people notice what we think of as motor issues around, as you say, walking or balance or things like that. And often we thought those are about muscles, right? That older people, maybe they lose some of their leg muscles, so they're more likely to fall. And that is to some extent true. But the brain actually plays a huge role in mobility and walking. And the reason is because as you walk, or if you trip and start to fall, the visual world moves past you, right? And your brain has to notice all of this visual activity. And that information is almost the first trigger, as well as the balance of your inner ear, to tell the brain that you're falling and take a response. As the brain slows down, it doesn't notice that as quickly. And so when you begin to fall, you're not as likely to notice quickly that you're falling. Now, it turns out that actually these same visual exercises have been shown in other studies done at the University of Illinois to actually improve balance in older people as well, probably by improving that brain speed of visual processing. And what it really tells us is the body and the brain are deeply related, right? Sometimes we think of the brain as this kind of mystical, black box that happens to be inside of our head. But of course, it's an organ of our body, just the way our liver is, just the way our stomach is. And of course, it gives rise to much richer and experiences than our liver or our stomach. But nonetheless, it is a piece of tissue that has to be kept healthy, and it relates to the body in this complex way. And while it's almost certainly true that by improving our body's health, we can improve our brain health, but also it seems like by improving our brain health, we can probably improve our physical health, our body's health.
So would exercising actually improve people's moods? They've had greater confidence and maybe less depression?
There's a tremendous number of studies right now that make that argument, that by going out, even by regular walking, by exercising independently in the gym with friends, that as well as the body physical benefits we might expect, lower cholesterol rates and lower bodily fat and greater health, that people's brain health is improved at the same time, that they stay sharper and they stay more cognitively fit. And in fact, the National Academy of Medicine last year suggested that there are now 3 kinds of interventions that promote brain health. And the first was physical exercise. In the same way we think about body health, they said, hey, this almost certainly improves brain health. The second thing they suggested was maintaining correct blood pressure. It's now been shown, I think, increasingly clearly that high blood pressure creates slight brain damage over time, and that can lead to cognitive decline and dementia. So if you're supposed to take your blood pressure pills, you should do that. And then the third thing that the National Academy recommended was this specific kind of scientifically based cognitive training, that these kinds of things, that these kinds of speed and accuracy exercises could improve brain health. So I think we're moving towards a time, we're not quite there yet, but step by step we're getting there, where doctors will be able to recommend specific brain health programs for people exactly in the same way that they recommend physical health programs for people right now.
So explain, Dr. Manka, what happens with the brain as a result of the speed training, maybe some of the physiological changes.
Sure. So what happens as we get older is that the brain actually gets a bit noisier, one might say. Imagine you're listening to the radio, and now you and I might remember this when radios used to have dials, right?
yeah.
And imagine you're listening to the radio and the dial gets off a little bit and it starts to get kind of staticky. Well, the brain has to work harder to hear what's going on in the presence of that noise. And in fact, we know that that's true. If I were to give you a memory test in a clear listening environment like right now, I might be able to read you 16 words and you're a sharp guy. Maybe you can remember 12 or 13. That's pretty good. But if I read those same 16 words to you in a really noisy environment, right? We're at a rock concert with your mom, and you're not going to be able to remember 12 anymore. You might only remember 5 or 6 because the brain has to overcome that noise. As we get older, that noise is actually coming from inside the brain itself as a result of the physical aging of the brain's tissue. Now, what these speed and accuracy exercises do, it's like they bring that radio back onto the signal and eliminate that noise. So information moves through the brain strongly and more accurately. And so when it hits the memory centers of the brain, when it requires attention from the brain, that information is there in a sort of a loud, clear format, one might say, and a person can remember it better and act on it better.
So will brain exercises actually improve someone's driving ability?
Yeah, there's wonderful evidence now on this front. So there have been great clinical trials from universities showing that this kind of visual speed and accuracy improvement makes people safer drivers. There was a wonderful study done in Kentucky, for example, where they actually had people drive a course with city driving and country driving and counted the number of dangerous driving maneuvers they've made. A person actually sat in the back seat of the car, and every time someone made a turn that had an oncoming car, they checked a box. Must have been a terrifying study to be a scientist on. And what they showed is that after this kind of brain training, people made fewer dangerous driving maneuvers. They also showed in a large study that they had about 50% fewer at-fault crashes because they were sharper and more aware of everything around them. They could notice that a car was coming in maybe at an intersection and step on the brake. And then most recently, we've been working with an auto insurance company here in the US, the American Automobile Association. They offer this program at no cost for their older drivers. And with them, we've been able to show that people who do the program actually reduce their actual crash-related claims. They have fewer crashes, they cost the insurer less, and of course, everyone's happy to stay out of a crash, right? Saves you time and money and maybe your health. And seeing that real-world crash reduction go down is incredibly dramatic. So the brain's really involved in so much of what we do. Often people think, well, it's just about memory, and memory is important. But of course, the brain is, it's the center in many ways of who we are. It involves our movement and our driving and our pleasure in life and our sense of self. And keeping that strong in the same way we want to keep our body strong, that's just seen to be increasingly important as the science comes in.
So would these kinds of brain exercises really be helpful for somebody under the age of 27? For some of the younger people, would it help decrease the risk of developing dementia later in life?
Yeah, there's two questions there, and they're both extremely interesting. The first is, hey, we can improve cognitive function in older people. How about taking a young, sharp person and make them even sharper? And, it really looks like the answer to that is yes. Now, there haven't yet been large-scale studies on this, but we know from individuals who use our training programs who are younger that they tell us that they feel sharper and they're sharper afterwards. Of course, one of the best examples is the quarterback, Tom Brady, from the New England Patriots. He actually came to us several years ago. Biggest shock of my life, right? I'm a lab rat. If you ever asked me, hey, do you think you'll ever meet the quarterback for the New England Patriots? I would have said, no, that's probably not on my life plan.
Dr. Monka, go deep, go deep.
Yes, that's right. It's a truly desperate situation for the Pats. But he and his trainer called us up and said Thomas started using the program because, he's a guy who's at the 99th percentile and needs to be at the 99.9th if he's going to keep winning Super Bowls. And he told us that using these visual training exercises, they helped him see down the field faster and more accurately. He's only got a few seconds when he gets the ball between that, picking his play, hitting his receiver before he's going to get tackled. And we hear more and more things like that. The other question you asked is, hey, if you had a lifelong program of cognitive exercise, would you show a lower risk of dementia? And that's a really interesting question. Of course, it's an extremely hard study to do, right? To start someone in their 20s and then ask 50 years later, do they have less dementia? But there are some kind of hints of this, right? There's a wonderful study done up in Minnesota with a group of nuns. And what they saw was these nuns were wonderful people, and they had volunteered to donate their bodies and their brains for science after they passed away. and an incredibly unique and giving population because, of course, what had happened in their lives at the nunnery was very well documented, right? If someone were to study you or me, it might be hard to figure out what we ate 20 years ago, right? But the nuns, it was pretty clear what they were eating 20 years ago, for example. And so they actually were able to look at the diaries of these nuns when they were young women writing essays around why they had joined the nunnery and show that the young women who had written the more complex essays with greater cognitive function at the age of 17 or 19 or 21 were actually less likely to get dementia 50 years later when they passed away and donated their minds and bodies to science. And so what that tells us is that something about our youth is setting ourselves up for our age 50 years later. And in the same way that we think of physical health as a lifelong activity, no one would say, don't bother exercising until you're 65. That's when you start to need to exercise. No one would say that, right? We know you got to exercise in your 20s, your 30s, and beyond. And I think that what we'll see in the future very much is we'll see that we need to have our brain sharp at all ages to set ourselves up for success in life later. And this was further just shown about 2 years ago when a first study showed that people who did this precise kind of brain exercise was shared at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference 2 years ago and provided the first evidence that this kind of brain exercise could reduce the risk of going on to dementia. Now, there's a lot more studies going on in that area. I always want to be very careful about how I describe that, but I think for a lot of us in the field, it raised hope for the first time that this kind of brain exercise could do exactly what you're thinking about.
So, Dr. Manka, we only have a few moments left here. We need to let our viewers know how to access this kind of training. Is speed training available to the general public?
Yeah, it's part of the BrainHQ program, and people can go to www.brainhq.com. They can register for free for BrainHQ. It will actually give them an exercise every day to try out. And of course, if they like it and they want the whole program, they can subscribe. And it's really meant to be pretty inexpensive. So I think in Canada, it's about 120 Canadian dollars a year, about $10 a month.
Neuroscientist Dr. Henry Manka, CEO of Posit Science, joining me from San Francisco, California. Thanks a lot for your time today, Doctor.
Thanks, Hal. And again, I look forward to seeing the band when you come through.
Oh, absolutely. We'll go on tour. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.